The CEO called me to lunch only to break the news that the company was heading in a new direction. After creating the entire tech division from scratch, I was being replaced by the owner's nephew. I smiled and said, "These things happen." Nobody realized I had suspected this change for months. My name is Derek. I'm 42 years old, and for the past 11 years I've been the foundation of Riverton Manufacturing's IT infrastructure. If you looked at our website or quarterly reports, you wouldn't see that, though I built our network security from the ground up back when we were still stuck with Windows XP and passwords scribbled on sticky notes. What started as a 5-person help desk grew into a 30-person team that kept 3 production plants running around the clock. The machines in Milwaukee never stopped, and neither did I. Honestly, I wasn't meant to stay that long. I took the job as a temporary gig after my divorce, just something to keep me occupied while I figured out my next move. But I was good at it. Really good. Somewhere along the way, those servers and networks became mine, not legally, but in every way that counted. The lunch was at Maxwell's, a place with white tablecloths where executives bring clients they want to impress, not exactly where you'd expect to be fired, but Preston Campbell, our CEO, cared a lot about appearances. "Derek, you've been invaluable," he said, cutting into his steak, "but we need fresh eyes, someone who sees where technology is headed." Translation: we found someone cheaper who won't argue when the board makes dumb calls. Harrison's nephew had just wrapped up his master's at MIT, a bright kid focused on digital transformation. I nodded and took a sip of water. "Who's managing the handover?" Preston looked relieved I wasn't causing a scene. "You've got 6 weeks, we'll announce it after the quarterly all hands." Before dessert, I signed the NDA he'd brought, smiled, shook his hand, and told him I understood business decisions sometimes had to be made. Back at my desk, I noticed my admin privileges had already been stripped. My name was gone from the leadership email chain. The decision had been made before lunch, probably weeks ago. That night I couldn't sleep, not out of anger, though there was plenty of that, not because I was scared about finding a new job, but because of something I'd spotted in the server logs 3 months earlier. Repeated unauthorized access attempts from an IP traced to the executive floor, someone poking into systems they shouldn't even know about, reading my documentation, security protocols, contingency plans. They weren't just replacing me. They were mining me for everything I knew first. I moved to Milwaukee 16 years ago. Following Ellie after we got married, I left a solid security job in Minneapolis because she got accepted into grad school here. We were young and ambitious. I figured I'd land on my feet. The divorce hit me like a freight train. 7 years of building a life, then suddenly papers left on the kitchen counter. "We want different things," she said. "No fights, no warnings, just done." When Riverton hired me, I was crashing on my brother's couch. They needed someone to patch up a failing network after a ransomware attack. I was supposed to be temporary, but I saw potential. These factory guys knew machines but not computers. Their entire operation, millions in equipment and hundreds of jobs, was running on outdated systems, one crash away from disaster. I pitched Preston a 5-year overhaul plan. He gave me the budget and let me run. For 3 years, I barely saw daylight, rebuilding every network, training staff, setting up backups and fail-safes. When the Northeast blackout hit, we were the only plant in the region that stayed online. The board noticed Preston started inviting me to meetings. My budget tripled. I hired a team, great people like Vanessa, my right hand, and Luis, a coder who could solve anything. We weren't just it anymore. We were the reason Riverton could promise clients they'd never miss a deadline. At the 2019 company Christmas party, Harrison Wells, the majority owner, shook my hand. "You turned us into a modern operation," he said. "We couldn't have grown without your systems." I thought I'd found my place, somewhere I actually mattered. The first warning came last September when an unannounced consultant showed up to audit our digital infrastructure. He asked simple questions about systems I designed myself. When I asked who'd authorized the audit, he mentioned the executive team and quickly changed the subject. Then my access to board meeting minutes disappeared from the shared drive. Server cleanup, the explanation said. In December, Preston began canceling our weekly briefings, always with some reasonable excuse. At the New Year leadership retreat, I overheard Harrison talking about his nephew graduating. "Brilliant with computers," he said. "Silicon Valley companies are fighting over him." I didn't think much of it. I should have. The final sign came when Vanessa told me about a meeting she'd been invited to, a strategic planning session I should have been leading. When she mentioned my name, Preston quickly changed the topic. "Something feels off," she said, "like they're planning around you." I brushed it off, too loyal for my own good, as my ex used to say. 2 days after that lunch, I stood alone in the server room at 7 p.m., long after most had left. The quiet hum of machines always calmed me. These racks, the blinking lights, cooling systems, I'd hand-picked every piece and designed the backups. This was my territory. I ran my hand along the main console's edge, 11 years of my life hidden behind these walls, working late nights. I turned to find Nathan Blake, Harrison's nephew, in the doorway. Clean cut, wearing an expensive watch, radiating casual confidence, no older than 30. "Just routine checks," I said. "You need something?" He walked in like he owned the place. "Preston said you'd be showing me around soon." Did he? Nathan studied the server setup. Impressive. A bit old school, but solid. Old school. I'd upgraded those systems 8 months ago. "Your documentation's thorough," he added. "I've been reading your protocols. Got some ideas for modernization." He said it like he was doing me a favor. I wasn't looking forward to hearing them. After he left, I sat at my workstation and opened the access logs. Nathan's credentials had been created 3 weeks before my lunch with Preston. He'd already been granted top-level admin access and had browsed through my entire documentation library. I grabbed my phone and texted Luis, "Can you meet tomorrow before work? Coffee at Joe's, 6:30. That night, I drove to the lakefront, parked where Ellie and I used to watch sunsets. The water was dark beneath the winter sky. I thought back to the day Preston promoted me to director. "You're the backbone of this place," he told me. "We couldn't run without you." Turns out backbones are replaceable too. The next morning, Luis was already waiting for me at the coffee shop, his eyes shadowed by dark circles. It was clear he sensed something was off. "They're phasing me out," I said straight away, no beating around the bush. He nodded slowly. "I figured they've been asking strange questions, making me explain your systems." "How long?" I asked. "A couple of weeks now." He stared down into his coffee. "I'm sorry, man. I should have told you sooner." I didn't hold it against him. Luis had kids, a mortgage. "So, what's your plan?" He pressed. I hadn't even thought about it until that moment. But sitting there, watching early commuters rush past the window, something settled inside me. A clarity I hadn't felt since the day I found Ellie's divorce papers. "They think everything's in the documentation," I said quietly. "But we both know that's not true." Luis leaned in. "The proprietary tools, the hacks and workarounds." I nodded. "The patches I wrote that aren't in any manual, the custom monitoring system, the client interface only, I truly understand, Derek. I'm not about to sabotage anything," I told him, "but I'm not handing over what's mine either." Luis looked me over for a moment, then gave a slow nod. He got it. "I need copies of everything I personally developed," I said, "and I need to know who's still loyal." The official announcement came during the company-wide meeting the following week. Preston stood at the podium, talking about exciting transitions and fresh perspectives. Nathan stood beside him, smiling politely at all the right moments. Derek has been instrumental in building our IT infrastructure, Preston said, deliberately not meeting my eyes. We appreciate his contributions as he assists in transitioning leadership to Nathan over the next 6 weeks. Whispered murmurs spread across the room. Most of the IT team looked stunned. Vanessa caught my eye from across the hall, a silent question. I gave her a barely perceptible nod. After the meeting, I arranged a sit-down with Preston and HR. I pointed out that several of the systems Nathan was about to take over had been built by me during off hours, using my own development framework. Diane from HR slid a document across the table. "The employment contract is clear," she said. "Anything developed during your tenure belongs to the company." "Not everything," I countered. "The system sync interface was developed before I joined Riverton. I licensed it to the company but retained ownership. It's in the original agreement." Preston shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. "That was 10 years ago, Derek. The company has evolved. So has System Sync. Every update and integration since then was built on your original code." I leaned in. "I'm not trying to be difficult, I just want fair compensation for my intellectual property." Preston and Diane exchanged a glance. "We'll look into it," Preston said at last. "In the meantime, please focus on the transition with Nathan." I knew that look. They were buying time. The next morning, my access to the development servers was restricted. "Security protocol during transitions," the automated email explained. "Nathan called a team meeting but didn't invite me. When I showed up anyway, he looked irritated but quickly masked it." "Derek, glad you could join," he said. "I was just outlining some changes to the network architecture." I leaned casually against the doorframe. "Which architecture specifically?" He spoke confidently. "The main production floor systems. We're streamlining protocols." "Those protocols prevent machine failures during peak loads," I said evenly. "They're custom designed for our equipment." Nathan's smile tightened. "Modern systems don't need such complicated workarounds." Vanessa cut in. "They're not workarounds. They're essential adaptations for our specific hardware. Derek designed them after the 2018 failure." The room fell silent. Nathan's confidence faltered briefly. Then he said, "Well, I appreciate the history, but we're moving forward with streamlining." Turning to the whiteboard, he effectively dismissed me. Later that day, legal emailed me. The company was claiming full ownership of all systems, including System Sync, citing a clause about integrated technologies becoming company property. They offered a technology acquisition bonus, $5,000. The real betrayal hit the next day. I discovered Nathan had scheduled one-on-one meetings with each team member, not to discuss transition but full job evaluations. He was deciding who to keep. Luis texted afterward. He asked if your systems were really necessary or just overcomplicated, fishing for negative feedback. That night, I found an email in my personal account from one of our suppliers, confused about a new licensing agreement Riverton had sent, one I'd never heard about. I pulled up the document. Preston had signed a deal transferring all my custom supplier integrations to a third-party vendor, a startup founded by Nathan's former classmate. They weren't just pushing me out, they were dismantling everything I'd built and selling it off. When I tried to access the backup servers to retrieve my original code, my credentials had been completely revoked. Game on. I needed leverage, and fast. Riverton hadn't been careless. They'd been calculating. The timeline was becoming clear. Nathan had been brought in months ago to study my systems, prepping to replace me while extracting everything I knew. That night, I reached out to Darren Phillips, a network security specialist I'd worked with years ago. We met at a diner off the highway, the kind of place Preston and other execs would never enter. "Legally, you're in a tough spot," Darren said after hearing my story. "But something doesn't add up. Why push you out now? The company's doing well." "That's what I can't figure out," I admitted. "Let me dig around," he offered. Just info gathering. Nothing invasive. 2 days later, Darren called at 11 p.m. "You need to see this." He'd uncovered SEC filings revealing Riverton was prepping for acquisition. TechCore Industries, a Boston-based manufacturing conglomerate, was in late-stage talks to buy them out. The deal hinged on Riverton showing modernized tech infrastructure and transitional leadership. "They're cleaning house to sweeten the sale," Darren explained. "Your systems are a major selling point. The valuation specifically mentions the proprietary manufacturing management interface, your system sync." There was more, Darren went on. Harrison Wells had cashed out most of his shares last quarter. The acquisition would mainly benefit Preston and the exec team. Golden parachutes and positions at TechCore awaited them. What broke me wasn't the acquisition news. It was finding emails proving Preston and Harrison had discussed replacing me over 6 months ago. While I was pulling all-nighters fixing a major security breach, they were interviewing Nathan. I drove to the old industrial park where I'd first sketched the system sync architecture when it was just an idea. I sat in my car until dawn, watching the sky fade from black to gray above the empty warehouses. When I finally got home, I rummaged through my closet and found an old external hard drive. Plugging it in, I located exactly what I'd been searching for, the original system sync code from before Riverton existed. Alongside it, I discovered documentation proving I'd begun development 8 months before officially joining the company. And there were the emails too. Preston explicitly requesting that I integrate System Sync with Riverton systems, acknowledging it as my proprietary tool and promising we'd formalize ownership once everything settled. I'd trusted him. Fool me once. The very next day, Nathan summoned me to a meeting with Preston and Diane from HR. "We're speeding up the transition," Preston said bluntly. "Your last day will be next Friday." 2 weeks instead of 6, I noted. "Is there a particular reason for that?" Diane answered smoothly. "Nathan has demonstrated exceptional capability, and frankly, Derek, your attitude hasn't helped with a smooth handover." I nodded slowly. "I see." Nathan added, "We'll need all documentation and training wrapped up by Wednesday." "Of course," I replied evenly. "And what about System Sync's ownership? Have you reviewed the original agreements?" Preston's face tightened. "Our legal team has determined all integrated systems belong to the company. The separation package is generous. I suggest you accept it." I stood. "I'll have my lawyer review everything." Preston warned, "Don't make this difficult. It won't change the outcome." As I walked out, I texted Luis, "Plan B tonight." 7 hours later, in the parking lot of a grocery store, Luis handed me a flash drive. "Everything you asked for," he said quietly. "Original code bases, deployment logs, authentication keys." I thanked him, then asked, "Why are you helping me?" He looked me straight in the eye. "Because they think we're all replaceable." That weekend, I painstakingly documented everything: the original System Sync code, the emails with Preston, the licensing agreements, and the proof that I developed the core technology before Riverton existed. Monday morning, I arrived early to find Vanessa already at her desk, looking exhausted. "Heard about the accelerated timeline?" she asked. I nodded. "How's the team handling it?" "Not well," she said in a low voice. "Nathan ran emergency planning sessions all weekend, trying to reverse engineer your monitoring system. Didn't go well." "Any injuries?" I asked. "No, but they had to shut down line 3 for 4 hours, cost about $40,000 and lost production." I kept my face neutral. "Sorry to hear that." Vanessa hesitated. "Derek, I think I'm next. Nathan's questioning if my role is necessary." I'd suspected as much. Vanessa knew too much about how things really worked. "Do you trust me?" I asked softly. Without hesitation, she said yes. I slid a sealed envelope across her desk. "If anything unusual happens this week, open this. It explains everything." That afternoon, I met with 3 patent attorneys, paying rush fees to file provisional patents on key components of System Sync. Not the entire system, just the critical parts that made it work with manufacturing equipment. On Tuesday, I completed all the transition documentation Nathan requested, attended his planning meeting, and answered questions politely. Model employee mode. Meanwhile, Darren helped me set up a secure off-site server. By midnight, I'd transferred all my original code and created a standalone version of System Sync that could run independently from Riverton's infrastructure. Wednesday morning, an email from TechCore Industries landed in my personal inbox, an invitation to discuss mutual business opportunities at their regional office. They'd heard I was leaving Riverton and wanted my expertise. Someone was hedging bets. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and called TechCore's VP of Operations, suggesting a meeting after my official Riverton departure. He agreed immediately. That night, I set the key part of my plan in motion. Using credentials Luis had saved, I updated 3 critical System Sync components. I added digital signature verification to detect unauthorized code changes. I updated the license to expire exactly 8 days later, 1 day after my official exit. I created a clean legal transition path. The system would keep running if a proper license agreement was signed. Nothing destructive, nothing malicious, just protecting what was mine. Thursday, Nathan pulled me into his office. "Some team members say you've been acting strangely," he said. "Anything I should know about?" "Just focused on wrapping things up," I replied calmly. He studied me, suspicious. "We're changing all system passwords and access credentials tomorrow, right after you leave. Standard procedure." "Makes sense," I said, "though it won't affect System Sync's core functionality." "Meaning?" he pressed. "The system's designed to work regardless of admin changes. That's its strength." I could see him weighing whether I was threatening him or just sharing facts. He guessed wrong. "I think we're good here," he said, dismissing me. "Legal will meet with you tomorrow for final paperwork." As I walked out, Preston passed by in the hallway, barely a nod. 11 years reduced to that. By midnight, everything was set. I sent one last email to my private server. Verification sequence Alpha 7 complete. The countdown had begun. Friday morning, I handed in my badge, signed exit papers, and declined the celebration lunch Nathan had arranged, much to Preston's visible relief. As I headed to my car, Luis called. "It's done," he said. "Nathan just changed all the admin passwords. They're doing a full system review this afternoon." "Thanks for letting me know," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we wait." I spent the weekend at home, ignoring calls from unknown numbers, and finally slept better than I had in months. Monday at 9:17 a.m., just as the production floor hit peak operation, every instance of System Sync across Riverton's 3 facilities flashed the same message. "License expired. Please contact the developer to renew." By 9:20, the first production line ground to a halt. By 9:45, all 3 plants were offline. At 10:30, Preston called me personally. "What the hell did you do?" His voice was trying to be authoritative, but panic leaked through. "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "The software license expired. As the developer and owner of System Sync, I'm happy to discuss renewal terms." "This is sabotage," he hissed. "It's standard license management," I corrected him. "Check the original integration agreement from 11 years ago. Clause 7 clearly states Riverton licensed the technology, not purchased it." Silence on the line. "I've sent your legal team a proper licensing agreement," I continued. "The terms are straightforward. Recognition of my ownership, fair compensation for continued use, and a non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of my exit." "That's extortion," Preston said. "That's business," I replied. "These things happen." By 3 p.m., their lawyers had reviewed all my documentation. By 5 p.m., the agreement was signed. 3 days later, I sat across from TechCore's vice president of operations in their downtown office. He slid a contract across the table. "We're still acquiring Riverton," he said, "but we want you to lead the technical integration as a consultant, not an employee." The salary was double what Riverton had paid me. I'd have full control over my hours and work location. "What about Nathan?" I asked. The VP's expression tightened. "Mr. Blake is transitioning to other opportunities." That afternoon, I signed the contract. 2 weeks later, Luis called with news that Nathan had quietly been removed from his position. The official story was that he'd pursued other ventures. The real reason? 3 major clients threatened to pull their contracts after repeated system failures. Preston stayed on as CEO through the acquisition, but his role at TechCore was mostly ceremonial. No real authority, no real team, just a fancy title and an office tucked away from decision-makers. I didn't feel the vindication I'd expected, just a quiet certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. The following month, I used my first consulting paycheck to put a down payment on a small cabin by the lake. Nothing extravagant, just a peaceful spot with a deck overlooking the water, somewhere I could watch the sun set and rise again. Vanessa joined my consulting team 3 months later. Eventually, Louise and half of my old department were working with me, not for me, partners in a growing business. About a year after it all went down, I ran into Preston at a downtown restaurant. He started to walk away but then stopped and came over to my table. "You won," he said simply. I looked at him, really looked, noticed the lines around his eyes, his slightly rumpled suit. He'd aged. "It wasn't about winning," I replied honestly. "It was about knowing your value." He nodded once, then walked away. I stayed seated a while longer, watching the city lights flicker on across the river, thinking about systems, the ones we build, the ones we break, and the ones that outlast us all.